and only the BBC in England, and they would play it. We would know when they'd play it. It would be like...
For over 6 decades, Ringo Starr has been the heartbeat of rock and roll's most legendary band, the Beatles. With his easy smile, calm presence, and steady rhythm, Ringo became the glue that held together a group that changed music forever. But now, heartbreaking news has surfaced, and it's left fans around the world in tears. At 84, Ringo Starr has always seemed unstoppable, still touring, still flashing his signature peace signs, still spreading his message of peace and love. But behind the cheerful grin lies a deep pain that time can't erase. In a recent emotional moment, Ringo opened up about the loneliness of being one of the last surviving Beatles. With John Lennon and George Harrison long gone, Ringo admits that the memories grow heavier with every passing year. He revealed that not a single day goes by when he doesn't think about his brothers, the men who shaped his life and defined an entire generation. "If I could say one thing to them," he confessed softly, "it would be, I love you, and I miss you." Those few words broke the hearts of millions. For fans, it's a painful reminder that the era of the Beatles, the laughter, the chaos, the brilliance, is fading into history. And for Ringo, it's a realization that no amount of fame, fortune, or applause can fill the silence left behind by his fallen friends. Yet through the sorrow, Ringo continues to honor their memory the only way he knows how, through music. He still performs the classics, not for nostalgia, but as a living tribute to the bond that changed the world. Because when Ringo Starr sits behind his drums, for just a moment, the magic of the Beatles lives again. Long before the world knew him as the smiling, peace sign-flashing drummer of the Beatles, Ringo Starr was just Richard Starkey, a young boy growing up in the rough neighborhoods of Liverpool, England. His early life was anything but easy. Born in 1940 during the chaos of World War II, Ringo spent much of his childhood battling illness. By the time he was 6, he had spent nearly 2 years in a hospital due to a burst appendix and complications that followed. The doctors doubted he'd ever lead a normal life, but fate had a different rhythm planned for him. While other kids were outside playing football, Ringo was confined to his hospital bed, surrounded by the constant ticking of medical machines. It was there, in that lonely stillness, that he first discovered rhythm, tapping spoons on the bed rails, drumming to the sound of his own heartbeat. He didn't know it then, but those taps were the first beats of a musical destiny that would soon change the world. By the late 1950s, Liverpool's working-class streets were alive with the pulse of skiffle, a raw, energetic mix of folk and rock that captured the imagination of every teenager looking for escape. Ringo joined a local band called Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, where he developed his unique drumming style, steady, reliable, and full of soul. Fans loved his relaxed, natural rhythm, and other musicians noticed too, including 3 ambitious lads known as John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison. At that time, the Beatles were just another local band trying to make their name. They already had a drummer, Pete Best, but something wasn't clicking. When they saw Ringo play one night in Hamburg, Germany, they knew he was different. His timing was flawless, his stage presence magnetic. He didn't just keep the beat, he felt it. In August 1962, fate struck again. The Beatles invited Ringo to officially join the band, replacing Pete Best. It was a decision that changed music forever. Within months, the Beatles exploded from a small-time Liverpool act into a global phenomenon. For Ringo, it was a whirlwind. One day he was playing in smoky clubs for a few shillings. The next, he was performing before screaming crowds that stretched as far as the eye could see. The world fell in love with the Beatles, and Ringo, with his humble smile and natural charm, became the heart of the group. Unlike John's rebellious wit, Paul's perfectionism, or George's quiet spirituality, Ringo was the glue that held them together. He wasn't the loudest or the most outspoken, but his humor, kindness, and steady presence kept the band grounded when fame threatened to tear them apart. When the cameras stopped flashing, it was often Ringo who broke the tension with a joke or a quiet word of calm. Paul McCartney once said, "Ringo was our rock. He never complained, never lost his cool." We all leaned on him more than people realized, but being the peacekeeper wasn't easy. The pressure was relentless, the touring endless. As the Beatles' fame skyrocketed, so did the chaos around them. Screaming fans, sleepless nights, and constant media attention left little room for normal life. Ringo, like the others, sometimes struggled under the weight of it all, but he never showed it. Through it all, his drumming remained the heartbeat of the band. On classics like Come Together, A Day in the Life, and Something, Ringo's subtle but masterful touch turned simple beats into timeless moments. Critics who once dismissed him as the lucky one eventually recognized him as one of the most distinctive drummers in rock history. But beyond the fame and the music, it was the bond between the four of them that defined everything. They were brothers, arguing, laughing, growing together through the madness. Ringo later said, "We started out as mates who played music. That's all we ever wanted. Everything else just happened." That brotherhood would be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. The highs of Beatlemania brought unimaginable success, but the cracks beneath the surface were already beginning to show. And when the Beatles' world began to fall apart, Ringo's quiet strength would once again become the heartbeat holding the band and himself together. By 1964, the Beatles were no longer just a band. They were a revolution. From London to New York, from Tokyo to Toronto, the world couldn't get enough of them. The frenzy had a name, Beatlemania. And in the middle of it all was Ringo Starr, the man whose steady drumming and down-to-earth charm made millions of fans feel like he was one of them. Planes, hotels, and arenas blurred together into a whirlwind of lights, laughter, and noise. Everywhere they went, crowds screamed so loudly that the band could barely hear themselves play. For Ringo, it was both thrilling and terrifying. "We'd be on stage," he recalled, "and I'd just keep drumming because I couldn't hear a thing. I'd look at John's foot to know where we were in the song. It was chaos, glorious, exhausting chaos. But beneath the smiles and waves, something darker was growing. The pressure was unrelenting. The constant travel, the lack of privacy, the endless media attention, it wore them down. Even simple things like going to a cafe or walking down a street became impossible. And while the fans saw four best friends conquering the world together, behind the curtain, small cracks were beginning to form. Ringo, ever the peacekeeper, often found himself caught in the middle of rising tensions. John Lennon, brilliant but unpredictable, was beginning to drift into his own world, experimenting with art, philosophy, and substances that changed his perspective. Paul McCartney, the perfectionist, wanted every note to be flawless. George Harrison, the quiet mystic, longed for spiritual peace away from the spotlight. Ringo just wanted harmony, both musical and personal. "We were brothers," he said, "but like brothers we fought. We just happened to do it in front of the whole world." By the time the Beatles stopped touring in 1966, exhaustion had set in. The fun that once defined their early days was gone. They retreated to the studio, searching for meaning through their music. The result was a creative explosion. Albums like Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and the White Album redefined what rock music could be. But with that brilliance came friction. Recording sessions grew tense. Paul's attention to detail began to frustrate the others. John's growing relationship with Yoko Ono changed the group dynamic. George, bursting with his own songwriting talent, often felt overlooked. And Ringo, the band's emotional anchor, was starting to feel like a stranger in his own family. One day during the recording of the White Album in 1968, Ringo reached his breaking point. Feeling unappreciated and unwanted, he quietly packed his things and left. "I felt like they didn't need me anymore," he said later. "I thought, maybe it's time to go." When John, Paul, and George realized he was gone, panic set in. The chemistry that made their music special depended on all four of them, especially Ringo's steady rhythm and spirit. The band sent messages begging him to return. When he finally came back 2 weeks later, he found his drum kit covered in flowers, a gesture from George that said everything words couldn't. For a while, things felt better, but the peace was temporary. The more the fame grew, the more the band members drifted apart. The loss of their beloved manager, Brian Epstein, in 1967 was another devastating blow. He had been their guide, their mentor, the one who kept them united. Without him, the group began to unravel. In interviews, Ringo would later admit that those final years were the hardest. "We stopped being a band and became four people making records," he said. The laughter was gone. Still, even in the turmoil, the music they created was extraordinary. Songs like Let It Be, Something, and Here Comes the Sun carried traces of their pain, and proof that their bond, however strained, still produced magic. But by 1970, the inevitable happened. The Beatles announced their breakup, and the world mourned, as if it had lost a piece of its soul. For Ringo, it was heartbreaking. But not the end. As the dust settled, he decided to keep playing, to keep creating. For nearly a decade, John, Paul, George, and Ringo had lived as one. They ate together, laughed together, argued together, and shared dreams no one else could understand. Suddenly, that bond was gone. In the silence that followed, Ringo felt lost. "I didn't know who I was without them," he later admitted. "I wasn't the Beatles anymore. I was just me." At first, Ringo tried to find comfort in music. His first solo effort, Sentimental Journey, 1970, was an emotional collection of old standards, songs his parents had loved. It wasn't a rock album. It was Ringo's way of reconnecting with his roots. Then came Bocuse of Blues, 1970, a surprising country album recorded in Nashville. Critics were puzzled, but Ringo didn't care. He was experimenting, searching for his own sound. By the early 1970s, while John and Paul were writing hits and George was diving into spirituality, Ringo found his rhythm again. His 1973 album Ringo became a massive success, featuring songs like Photograph and You're 16. For a moment, it felt like the magic of the Beatles had returned. All four had even contributed to the album in some way. But behind the laughter and the fame, Ringo's personal life was slowly unraveling. Years of pressure, endless travel, and emotional exhaustion began to take a toll. Ringo fell into drinking heavily. What started as fun turned into dependency. The once cheerful drummer found himself sinking deeper into darkness. His marriage to Maureen Cox, his childhood sweetheart, began to crumble under the strain. "I was lost in my own world," Ringo later confessed. "I had money, I had fame, but I didn't have peace." By the early 1980s, Ringo's addiction nearly destroyed him. He isolated himself from friends and his health began to fail. Even his beloved drumsticks felt heavy in his hands. But life has a way of sending light when it's needed most. In 1980, Ringo met actress Barbara Bach on the set of the movie Caveman. What began as friendship soon turned into something deeper. Barbara saw through the rock star image and reached the broken man inside. When Ringo nearly lost control of his life to alcohol, Barbara stood by him, but she refused to let him destroy himself. Together, they entered rehab in 1988, beginning a journey of recovery that would define the rest of their lives. "We did it together," Ringo later said. "We decided we wanted to live." From that moment on, Ringo Starr began a new chapter, one focused on healing, gratitude, and peace. He reinvented himself as the ambassador of peace and love, a message he's carried across the world ever since. In the decades that followed, Ringo rebuilt his career on his own terms. He formed the All-Star Band, bringing together musicians from all walks of rock history to perform timeless songs in a spirit of joy and unity. "It's not about fame anymore," he once said. "It's about fun, friendship, and the love of music." But even as he smiled for the cameras, Ringo never stopped missing his Beatles brothers. When John Lennon was murdered in 1980, the loss hit him like a thunderclap. He and Barbara flew to New York immediately to comfort Yoko Ono and help take care of Sean Lennon. "It was the worst day of my life," Ringo said quietly. Then, in 2001, tragedy struck again when George Harrison passed away from cancer. Ringo was by his side in those final days. "He looked at me and said, 'Do you want me to come with you?'" Ringo recalled through tears. That was George. Even when he was dying, he was thinking of others. Those moments left scars that time could never erase. But they also deepened Ringo's gratitude for life, for every note, every smile, every sunrise. Today, Ringo Starr stands as one of the few remaining links to a band that changed the world. Through heartbreak, addiction, loss, and recovery, he's remained what he always was, the heartbeat of the Beatles, and the gentle soul who taught us all that love is stronger than fame, and peace louder than applause. As the years have passed, Ringo Starr has become more than a musician. He's a living symbol of survival, resilience, and peace. Now well into his 80s, the once young drummer from Liverpool still takes the stage, flashing his familiar peace signs and smiling like the boy who never stopped believing in love. But behind that bright grin lies a story of reflection, heartbreak, and a man who has outlived nearly everyone who shared his greatest triumphs. For Ringo, every year feels like a gift. After decades of chaos, addiction, and loss, he now lives life with a quiet sense of gratitude. "I wake up every day and say thank you," he often tells interviewers. "I'm still here, I'm still playing, and I'm still spreading peace and love. That's all I need." His peace and love mantra isn't just a catchphrase, it's the core of who he's become. Every July 7th, on his birthday, Ringo invites fans worldwide to join him in a global moment of peace and love. From Los Angeles to Tokyo, from Liverpool to New York, millions pause at noon to send out a simple message: peace and love to everyone, everywhere. For Ringo, it's his way of giving back the kindness the world once gave him, but his heart still carries the weight of memory. When he speaks about John Lennon, his voice softens. "I still miss him, man," he once said, eyes glistening. "He was my brother. We were different in every way, but we understood each other. Losing him, it left a hole that never heals." And then there's George Harrison, the quiet Beatle who shared Ringo's spiritual side. Ringo often recalls their last moments together in Switzerland in 2001. George was very ill, but he was still cracking jokes. "That's what we did, and we laughed." Even in the end, now with Paul McCartney as his last surviving bandmate, Ringo treasures their bond more than ever. The two often meet, sometimes for music, sometimes just for memories. "When we're together," Ringo says, "it's like no time has passed. It's two old friends remembering the days when the world went mad for four lads from Liverpool." Despite his age, Ringo hasn't slowed down much. His all-star band continues to tour, bringing generations of fans together in celebration of timeless music. His shows are filled with laughter, nostalgia, and energy, a living reminder that joy never grows old. Audiences often marvel at his stamina, but Ringo just shrugs. "Music keeps me young," he says. That and love. Yet behind the applause, Ringo is candid about the reality of aging. He's lost close friends, former bandmates, and even family members. Each goodbye reminds him of the fragile nature of time. "We can't stay here forever," he once said quietly. "But we can leave something that does." And leave something he certainly has. From Yellow Submarine to With a Little Help from My Friends, Ringo's voice and drumming are woven into the very fabric of modern music. What made him special wasn't just technical skill. It was his warmth, his timing, and his humanity. He gave the Beatles their heartbeat, and decades later, that beat still echoes. Outside of music, Ringo has found peace in simplicity. He paints, meditates, spends time with Barbara, and enjoys the quiet moments that fame once stole from him. The wild parties and hotel rooms are long gone, replaced with sunsets, art, and laughter shared with the woman who saved his life. "Barbara and I have been through everything," he says. "Now it's just about love and gratitude." When asked what he wants to be remembered for, Ringo doesn't hesitate. "I just want people to say, he loved life, he loved people, and he made us smile." That's enough. And maybe that's why Ringo Starr still matters. Because even after all the fame, tragedy, and loss, he never stopped believing in kindness. His life isn't just a story of a Beatle who survived. It's a story of a man who turned pain into peace and found light in the darkest corners of fame. Today, when fans see Ringo raise his hands and flash those peace signs, they're not just seeing a gesture. They're seeing the spirit of a generation that once believed love could change the world. And through Ringo Starr, that dream still lives on. Because as long as Ringo's heart keeps beating, the message remains the same. peace and love forever.